Oh, yes. A little Dropkick Murphys bumper music lets you know that the guest host on the Hugh Hewitt radio program is Kurt Schlichter, noted Los Angeles trial lawyer, senior columnist at Town Hall, retired United States Army colonel, selector of awesome bumper music. But that bumper music's going to offend my friend, my Irish pal, Michael Walsh, noted classical music aficionado. Michael, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Colonel Schlichter. How are you?
I am terrific. You know, we're personal friends and we talk a lot, and I know you're positively fuming about what's going on in Washington, D.C. And, you know, I got to tell you, I think there's some eerie parallels to ancient Rome, which, of course, kind of dovetails with your writing of the book, The Fiery Angel, where you kind of track a lot of the history of how we got here right now. What do you think? Are we in the fall of the American Republic?
Well, we are certainly, someone once said history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And it's certainly the transition from the Republic to the Empire in Rome with the assassination of Caesar and the rise of Augustus is a parallel that Americans ought to be aware of. My whole theory in writing my two books, The Devil's Pleasure Palace and The Fiery Angel, was to re-instruct our generation of ignoramuses who are not taught history, and therefore they're constantly surprised by everything that happens, whereas we conservatives know that the human being does not change much, and our history does echo constantly. So it really helps to know what happens when a country gives up its democratic ideals or its universalist ideals in our case, and decides to get run by a very small coterie of a priest class or of nobles or of families. It descends into madness and chaos eventually, and we're heading that way.
The liberal optimates, so to speak.
Yes, the privileged class.
Yeah, but you know the difference. One of the key differences. You look at the Roman elite, the patricians, and these were achievers. These were guys who went out and fought wars. They did amazing things. And look at our elite. What's our elite done right in the last 20 years? And don't say they made Twitter, because that doesn't count.
Well, the last 20, how about the last 50 or 60, all of which I can remember now that I just turned 70.
Oh, and happy birthday to you. That was yesterday. Well, look, at least 50 years ago, they put a man on the moon. That's something. You know, the civil rights, that's something. Beating the Nazis, that's something. Our elite has done nothing, yet their ego, their presumption, their arrogance seems to have grown by leaps and bounds in direct proportion to their total failure to do anything right.
Well, that's because they all went to Harvard, in my opinion. Just a little joke there for you Harvard people, but it's true. We have an elite class of mostly non-achieving, highly credentialed, but not particularly educated people running the country. As we were talking privately the other day, in Rome, the consuls, there were two every year. They got elected each year. So each year there was a new election for the two guys who would run the country. And when Rome fought a war, for example, the consuls went and fought it. Not only did they fight it, they led it. So they would come back either on their shields or with their shields. Sometimes they got killed, as they very often did. But the country had a stake in the political decisions because the leaders had a personal stake. Now they don't at all. And now instead of electing a leadership class, we elect a technocratic class that seems to think it's inherited its wealth, power, privilege. The Romans eventually became corrupt because the families were so corrupt, starting with the very first Julio-Claudian dynasty of Augustus and Tiberius, Caligula. What a bunch this is, right? And finishing up with Nero. We need to re-democratize our country, and we need to spread it out. The priest class has run us into the ground, and it's time to be aware of this.
And some of the priest class are very senior military leadership.
Yeah, I'm a little scared by this. As you know, I was raised by a Marine war hero, so I'm acutely aware of the role that civilian leadership plays in our military. And let's make this very clear to all the listeners too who don't have military background as we do. The rule is that the commander-in-chief is always right. effectively, unless he gives an outright illegal order. The officers are sworn to uphold the Constitution and therefore obey the commander-in-chief, who is the military doesn't run this country. The senior political leadership runs this country. And further, the military should shut up once they retire. If they want to be in politics, they should run for office as, I don't know, let's think of one. How about General Eisenhower, who won World War II? He ran for politics. But the key thing is, people don't remember, but I do because I'm so ancient now, is no one knew what party he was with until he declared for the Republican candidacy in 1952. So the leadership now that's sniping at Trump on every single front, as I like to say, what war did you guys win, buddy?
You know, that's a harsh question, but I think it's a fair one. You know, I'm a retired United States Army colonel, but I'm also a commentator, so I do this for a living.
Yes.
You have to look back. I was in the last decisive war, at least that part of the war that we won, Operation Desert Storm. That was about 30 years ago. And that itself was an anomaly since World War II. We have not had a decisive lasting victory at war in about 70 years. And, you know, a lot of the senior military leaders now are talking a big game, but I'm looking for the track record. Who's the guy who won in Afghanistan? We barely suppressed Iraq. That took us 8 years or 5 years. Where do these guys get off lecturing us about policy when they can't even do their own damn jobs right?
Well, that's my question. General Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, what war did you win, pal? General Petraeus, what war did you win, pal? We are still in Afghanistan almost 20 years later. We won World War II in 3.5, not quite 4 years. The problem, it goes back to the priest class now, who doesn't understand the meaning of the word victory. The word victory means they come to the battleship Missouri and they sign unconditional surrender papers. They go to Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia and they give up, and that is the end of it.
Well,
we no longer want victory. That's the problem.
And that's very Roman. The Romans, unless they were losing, didn't negotiate. You lost, and you lost hard.
The Romans, if they besieged your city, they gave you a chance to surrender. If you said no, they eventually would take your city down because they were the greatest siege army ever, and they would kill every single person in that city, every man, and then the women and children would be sold into slavery. That's what happened to you if you defied the Romans. I'm not saying that we ought to do that, but the Romans understood the meaning of total victory, as did our greatest generals, such as Ulysses S. Grant.
What I see now is a situation with an establishment that includes the State Department, includes the Pentagon, senior military leaders. And look, I'm a graduate of the United States Army War College, which is, you know, a party war college, but so be it.
In Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
In Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I got to tell you, the War College teaches you establishment foreign policy. Now, you have to understand that if you're operated at a general officer level. You need to understand that. Do you need to accept it is another thing. But a lot of these guys do. You know, you talk to some generals, and they will tell you with a straight face that America's greatest security threat is the weather in 100 years. And that is not an example of a serious military leader, in my view.
Correct. That is an example of a leader who's been indoctrinated by this climate change nonsense, which is just a wedge in order to basically destroy our technological civilization and return us to the status of cavemen, which is apparently what the left's new goal is now.
Well, returning us, not them. Because, of course, as the elite, right. They're so, like Pete Buttigieg, I'm so important, I have to fly around on a private plane. You can pedal your bike in the rain like a schmuck, but I'm taking a Gulfstream.
It's interesting. I was just reading about Tiberius Caesar as he was being adopted by Augustus, and he was a great general. He got to be an insane emperor, as most of them did, but he was a great general. At one point, one of his friends was killed in a battle up north in Italy, and he went up there and retrieved the body and walked all the way back to Rome in front of the funeral cortege of his friend. These guys really did put themselves on the line in a big way. They led from the front. They understood the perils of losing, and when the Romans lost, boy, did they lose.
Oh.
They lost every single
They
person
lost
had.
everything. Can you imagine our leaders? Can you imagine, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leading the legions going, no, we're cutting through the Teutoburg Forest, and that's final.
Yeah, well, they lost 3 legions doing that. They lost 50 to 75,000 men at Cannae, and they didn't lose the war. That is the point. The Romans rallied, and they raised new legions, and they finally expelled Hannibal during the Second Punic War and sent him back to Carthage, where they eventually destroyed the Carthaginians in total. Willpower and strength is important, but the key to our system is the commander-in-chief gives the orders, and you follow them. And we have an elected representative government, and the Democrats are desperately trying to take that away from us.
Well, Michael Walsh, I will preview for our audience a little something that I know. I know that a new book by you is coming out next year called Last Stands. I've read a little bit of it. It is legit fantastic. I'm not saying it because Michael's one of my closest friends. I'm saying it because you have got to see it. The minute it comes up, I'm going to tell you all about it, and I'm going to get my own copy. Michael Walsh, author of The Fiery Angel, thank you very much. This is Kurt Schlichter, guest hosting on The Hugh Hewitt Show. We're coming back with Michael Oren.